Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation of Steel. Vince Marlowe had built his empire from nothing. At 52, he commanded a construction and real estate development company worth 8 figures, his calloused hands still bearing the scars from his early days swinging hammers alongside migrant workers. Unlike the silver spoon executives he now competed against, Vince understood every bolt, every beam, every drop of sweat that went into creating something lasting. His office overlooked the Seattle skyline, where 3 of his residential towers pierced the clouds. Photos lined his desk. Linda, his wife of 25 years, her auburn hair catching sunlight in their wedding portrait. Rebecca, 23, graduating from law school. And Tommy, 19, in his army uniform before shipping overseas. The perfect American family, or so he believed. Vince's phone buzzed with a text from his site foreman, Miguel Santos, a man he'd trusted for 15 years. "Boss, need you to see something. Private. Can't talk over phone." 30 minutes later, Vince stood in the skeletal frame of his newest luxury development in Bellevue, steel beams casting shadows across the concrete floor. Miguel approached with hesitation, his weathered face grim. "Vince, I've been wrestling with this for weeks," Miguel began, his accent thick with emotion. "You've been good to me, to my family. But I can't stay quiet anymore." He handed Vince a manila envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Linda, his wife, wrapped in another man's arms outside the Fairmont Hotel. The timestamp showed 3 months ago. More photos followed. Intimate dinners, hands intertwined, passionate kisses in parking garages. The man was Trevor Hamilton, Vince's business competitor and former friend. They'd grown up in the same working-class neighborhood. But where Vince had clawed his way up through honest labor, Trevor had charmed his way into wealth through his father's political connections and strategic marriages to wealthy widows. "There's more," Miguel said quietly. "My cousin works valet at the Fairmont. Says they've been meeting there twice a week for 6 months. Always the same suite. Trevor pays cash, uses a fake name." Vince studied each photograph with the same methodical precision he applied to structural blueprints. His expression never changed, but Miguel noticed his hands, those powerful hands that had built an empire, trembling slightly. "Miguel," Vince said finally, his voice steady as reinforced concrete, "you've done me a favor I'll never forget. But I need you to promise me something. Not a word to anyone. Not your wife, not your cousin, not even your priest. Can you do that?" Miguel nodded solemnly. "Whatever you need, Vince." That evening, Vince sat in his home office, the photos spread across his mahogany desk like evidence in a crime scene. Through the window, he could see Linda tending to her prized rose garden, the same garden he'd spent 3 weekends building raised beds for last spring. She was humming, actually humming, while she watered flowers he'd paid for with money he'd earned breaking his back. The house itself was a testament to his love for his family. 4,000 square feet of custom-crafted perfection in the exclusive Medina neighborhood. Every fixture hand-selected, every room designed around his family's preferences. Linda's art studio occupied the entire 3rd floor. Rebecca's law books filled custom-built shelves in the library. Even Tommy's room remained untouched, waiting for his return from deployment. Linda entered his office carrying a glass of his favorite bourbon, neat, just as she had every evening for 2 decades. She leaned down to kiss his cheek, her perfume, expensive perfume he'd bought her for their anniversary, filling his nostrils. "How was your day, honey?" she asked, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. Vince looked at his wife, really looked at her. At 46, she remained stunning, her figure maintained through personal trainers and yoga instructors he funded. Her manicured nails, the subtle plastic surgery that had erased years from her face, the designer clothes that filled 2 walk-in closets, all purchased with his money while she played house and, apparently, played with Trevor Hamilton. "Productive," he replied, sliding the photos into his desk drawer. "Very productive." Chapter 2. The Text That Changed Everything. 3 weeks passed. Vince had conducted his investigation with the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to foundation inspections. Private investigator reports confirmed what Miguel's photos had revealed. Linda and Trevor weren't just having an affair. They were planning a future together. The recordings were particularly enlightening. Trevor's voice, captured through the PI's sophisticated equipment. Once the divorce is final, we'll have enough from Vince's assets to start fresh in Costa Rica. My contacts there can help us establish new identities if needed. Linda's response chilled him. He's been so generous lately, almost like he knows. Last week, he surprised me with a deed to our daughter's new house. Perfect timing. We can liquidate everything. Vince had indeed been generous. The house in Wallingford, a $1.2 million craftsman that Rebecca had fallen in love with, was his surprise graduation gift. He'd bought it outright, refusing to let his daughter start her legal career burdened by mortgage debt. The previous day, he'd also transferred funds for furniture, renovations, and a year's worth of utilities. His children's reactions had been telling. Rebecca's response was a perfunctory text. "Thanks, Dad." Tommy, calling from his base in Germany, had at least managed genuine gratitude before mentioning he couldn't wait to see the house when he returned. But it was Rebecca's behavior that truly opened Vince's eyes. Ever since graduating law school, she'd grown distant, entitled, treating him more like an ATM than a father. Her new boyfriend, a smooth-talking trust fund baby named Chad Morrison, had only encouraged this attitude. The revelation came Thursday evening when Vince was reviewing construction invoices in his home office. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "You weren't invited to dinner. Mom doesn't want you there." He stared at the message, reading it 3 times. Dinner. He'd forgotten. It was supposed to be a celebration of Rebecca's new job at a downtown law firm, a position she'd secured partly through connections he'd provided. He'd been invited, had even taken time off work, bought an expensive bottle of champagne. Vince called Rebecca immediately. "Sweetheart, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding, Dad." Rebecca's voice was cold, mechanical. "Mom explained everything. About how you've been suspicious and controlling lately. How you've been following her around, questioning her friends. She's uncomfortable having you here." The accusations hit like physical blows. Following her? He'd done nothing but work 16-hour days to maintain the lifestyle they'd all grown accustomed to. Controlling? He'd given them everything they'd ever wanted and plenty they hadn't even asked for. "Rebecca, I think your mother has given you some incorrect." "Dad, just stop. Chad and I are starting our own lives now. We don't need your drama." The line went dead. Vince sat in his office for exactly 12 minutes, processing what had just occurred. His daughter, his little girl who used to help him build birdhouses in the garage, had just cast him out of her life based on lies fed to her by her cheating mother. Then he moved with decisive action. First, he called his bank. "This is Vincent Marlowe. I need to stop payment on check number 47823 and reverse the electronic transfer authorization 552 AHG. Yes, immediately." Next, he accessed his online accounts and began methodically canceling automatic payments. Utilities for Rebecca's house. Insurance premiums. The furniture store payment plan. The contractor installing her custom kitchen. Each cancellation generated a confirmation email, which he systematically deleted from his phone. By the time he finished, 174 separate financial commitments had been severed. Rebecca's dream house would sit empty, half-furnished, with utilities being disconnected within days. His phone began ringing immediately. First Rebecca, then Linda, then Chad. He let each call go to voicemail, instead pouring himself a bourbon and opening his laptop. If his family wanted to play games, he'd teach them the difference between games and war. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Vengeance. Vince's phone had collected 47 missed calls and 63 text messages by Friday morning. He read each one with the dispassionate interest of a structural engineer examining stress points. Rebecca's messages evolved from confusion to anger to desperation. "Dad, what happened to the house payments? The electricity was shut off this morning. Chad's parents are asking questions. Please call me back. This is important. I'm sorry, okay? Just fix this, please." Linda's texts were more manipulative, Vince, you're being childish. Rebecca is crying. You need to fix whatever tantrum this is. People are starting to ask questions about our marriage. We need to talk immediately. But it was the message from an unknown number that caught his attention. Mr. Marlowe, this is Trevor Hamilton. I think we should meet. Vince smiled for the first time in weeks. He spent the morning at his construction site, watching his crews pour foundation concrete for a new commercial complex. The precision required for a perfect foundation was absolute. One miscalculation, one shortcut, and the entire structure would fail. The same principle applied to revenge. That afternoon, he met with his attorney, Harvey Goldstein, a sharp-eyed man who'd handled Vince's business affairs for 15 years. Harvey's office occupied the top floor of a downtown tower, its windows providing a commanding view of Elliott Bay. I need you to prepare some documents, Vince said, sliding a typed list across Harvey's mahogany desk. Asset protection, mostly. Separate business holdings from personal assets. Harvey studied the list, his eyebrows rising steadily. Vince, this looks like you're preparing for a divorce. A very hostile divorce. Just following your previous advice about protecting my business interests. The offshore accounts, the trust structures, this goes well beyond standard asset protection. You're talking about moving significant wealth completely outside potential settlement claims. Harvey, I built my company with my own hands and my own money. If someone wants to challenge that, they'll need to prove their contribution. Vince leaned forward. How long will this take? With the complexity you're requesting? 6 weeks, maybe 8. I need it in 3. Harvey set down the papers. Vince, I've known you for 15 years. You're the most methodical man I've ever met. You don't rush anything. What's happening? For a moment, Vince considered sharing everything. Harvey was bound by attorney-client privilege, and his counsel had always been sound. But this was bigger than legal strategy. Let's just say I'm planning for contingencies. That evening, Vince invited Miguel to his house for dinner. Linda was notably absent, attending a book club meeting that Vince knew was actually a rendezvous with Trevor. Rebecca was presumably dealing with her utility crisis. Over plates of takeout Chinese food, the two men sat in Vince's kitchen, the same kitchen where he'd once helped his children with homework, where Linda had once prepared family meals instead of scheming betrayals. Miguel, I need to ask you about your nephew Carlos, the one who works for Hamilton Construction. Miguel's face darkened. Carlos is a good kid, Vince. Whatever you're thinking, I'm not asking him to do anything illegal, but I need information. Trevor's current projects, his financial situation, his business practices, things that might be available to someone with access to his office files. Vince, Trevor Hamilton is dangerous. My Carlos needs that job. If this works the way I plan, Carlos won't need to work for Trevor much longer, because Trevor won't have a company to run. Miguel studied his friend's face, recognizing the cold determination that had built Marlowe Construction from a one-man operation into a regional powerhouse. What do you need to know? Vince pulled out a notebook, already filled with meticulous planning. Everything. His contracts, his suppliers, his subcontractors, his permit applications, his inspection schedules, his loan agreements. But most importantly, I need to know about the Eastgate Commons project. Miguel nodded slowly. Eastgate Commons was Trevor's most ambitious project, a $40 million mixed-use development that would make or break his company. If it succeeded, Trevor would join the ranks of Seattle's elite developers. If it failed, Carlos mentioned something about problems with that project. Permit delays, contractor issues. I want to know everything Carlos can find. And Miguel? This conversation never happened. Later that night, alone in his office, Vince spread architectural drawings across his desk. Not for his own projects, but detailed plans he'd acquired through carefully cultivated relationships in the city planning department. Plans for Eastgate Commons, showing every specification, every load-bearing calculation, every system integration. He found exactly what he was looking for on page 47, a critical flaw in the foundation design that Trevor's engineers had somehow missed. The building would be structurally sound for normal use, but one specific type of stress, the kind that might occur during a major earthquake, would cause catastrophic failure. Seattle sat on multiple fault lines. Earthquake preparedness wasn't just recommended, it was legally mandated. Vince picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. Rodriguez Engineering, this is Carmen. Carmen, this is Vince Marlowe. I need to speak with your husband about a consultation job. Private client, very confidential, excellent compensation. Dr. Antonio Rodriguez was the city's most respected seismic engineer, the man called in whenever earthquake safety questions arose. He was also a man who owed Vince a considerable favor. Vince's company had built Antonio's custom home at cost after Antonio had helped navigate some tricky foundation issues on an early Marlowe project. Antonio, I have a hypothetical question about earthquake preparedness. By midnight, Vince had outlined the opening moves of his campaign. Trevor Hamilton had built his success on charm, connections, and cutting corners. Vince would use each of those strengths against him. But first, he needed to deal with his family's growing desperation. His phone rang again, Rebecca calling for the 15th time that day. This time, he answered, Dad, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I've been busy. Busy? Dad, they shut off our water today. Chad's parents are asking if we can afford this house. My boss is wondering why I gave an address where I can't actually live. Interesting problem. Dad, I don't understand what's happening. Did the bank make a mistake? Are you having financial troubles? Rebecca, let me ask you something. When you texted me yesterday about dinner, did you think about how that would make me feel? Silence stretched across the line. Dad, Mom said you were being paranoid and your mother said, and you believed her without question, without talking to me, without considering that the man who's provided for you your entire life might deserve the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. You chose to exclude me from your celebration based on accusations you never bothered to verify. So now you can celebrate without my financial support as well. Dad, please. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough, Rebecca. Sorry doesn't fix broken trust. Sorry doesn't undo betrayal. He hung up and turned off his phone. In 3 weeks, when his asset protection strategy was complete, he would show them all the true meaning of consequences. Chapter 4. The web begins to weave. 3 weeks later, Vince's financial fortress was complete. Harvey Goldstein had outdone himself, creating a labyrinthine structure of offshore accounts, shell companies, and irrevocable trusts that would make Vince's assets virtually untouchable in any divorce proceeding. The beauty of the system was its complete legality, aggressive but unassailable. Simultaneously, Carlos Rodriguez had provided a treasure trove of intelligence about Trevor's operations. Trevor Hamilton Construction was leveraged to the breaking point, with the Eastgate Commons project consuming every available dollar and several million borrowed against future profits. Any significant delay or cost overrun would trigger a cascade of financial failures. Vince reviewed Carlos's latest report while sipping coffee in his downtown office. Trevor's company was scheduled to pour the foundation for Eastgate Commons in 2 weeks. All permits were in place, all inspections scheduled. Everything was proceeding perfectly according to Trevor's timeline. That was about to change. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Antonio Rodriguez. Report submitted to city planning as requested. Anonymous tip about potential seismic issues at Eastgate site. They'll have to halt construction pending review. Vince smiled and immediately called Miguel. Phase 1 is active. Is Carlos ready for Phase 2? He's nervous, Vince. Trevor's been asking questions about information leaks. Tell Carlos to stay calm and follow the script we discussed. Today's the day. That afternoon, Carlos Rodriguez accessed Trevor's computer system during the lunch hour rush when the office was largely empty. His assignment was simple. Alter a single line in the Eastgate Commons database, changing the delivery date for critical foundation materials from next Tuesday to next month. The beauty of the sabotage was its subtlety. When the steel delivery failed to arrive, Trevor would scramble to locate the missing order, eventually discovering the clerical error in his own system. But by then, the foundation pour would be delayed, putting him behind schedule and triggering penalty clauses with his general contractor. More importantly, the delay would give Dr. Rodriguez's seismic review time to work its way through the bureaucracy. While Carlos executed his mission, Vince drove to Wallingford to inspect Rebecca's house. The property sat empty and abandoned, weeds already beginning to overrun the professionally landscaped yard. Window notices from utility companies created a patchwork of warnings across the front door. Rebecca's BMW was parked in the driveway, and through the window, Vince could see her sitting on the floor in what would have been the living room, talking animatedly on her phone. Her gestures were sharp, frustrated, the body language of someone whose privileged world was crumbling. He didn't approach the house. Not yet. Instead, he drove to his next appointment, lunch with Chad Morrison's father. Robert Morrison was old Seattle money, a man whose family had profited from lumber and shipping for 3 generations. He occupied a corner table at the Columbia Tower Club, his silver hair perfectly styled, his custom suit impeccable. Robert had agreed to the meeting after Vince's cryptic phone call about mutual interests regarding our children. "Mr. Marlowe," Robert said as Vince approached the table, "I appreciate you reaching out. Rebecca seems like a lovely girl, though I understand there have been some financial complications recently." Vince ordered a steak, medium rare, and got straight to business. "Robert, your son is dating my daughter. I think we should discuss their future prospects." "Indeed, though I have to say, the situation with their house has raised some concerns. Chad mentioned utilities being shut off, contractors walking off the job. Is everything all right with your business?" "My business is excellent. In fact, I'm expanding. But I wanted to discuss Chad's employment prospects with your firm." Robert Morrison Sr. ran a boutique investment firm managing portfolios for Seattle's elite families. Chad worked there in a junior position, largely ceremonial, trading on his family name rather than any particular talent. "What did you have in mind?" "I'm considering some significant investments. The kind that might require specialized financial guidance. The kind that could be very lucrative for the right advisor." Vince cut his steak methodically. "I understand Chad has ambitions beyond his current role." Robert's eyes sharpened with interest. "How significant are we talking?" "8 figures to start. Possibly more as the relationship develops." This was true. Vince had recently liquidated several properties and was genuinely considering new investment vehicles, though not necessarily with the Morrison firm. That would certainly be substantial enough to warrant Chad taking on a more prominent role. "What sort of timeline did you have in mind?" "That depends on several factors. Chad's commitment to my daughter, for instance. The stability of their relationship." Robert nodded knowingly. Young people today can be impulsive. Perhaps Chad would benefit from understanding the potential ramifications of his personal choices. "I'm sure he would." They finished lunch, discussing investment strategies and mutual acquaintances. Robert promised to have a frank conversation with his son about the importance of stability and long-term planning. Vince knew exactly what that conversation would entail. Chad would be told to either commit completely to Rebecca, including dealing with whatever financial drama was affecting her family, or end the relationship before it jeopardized his career prospects. Either outcome suited Vince's purposes perfectly. That evening, he received the call he'd been expecting. "Vince, this is Trevor. I think it's time we talk face to face." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Meet me at McGillicuddy's tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Come alone." McGillicuddy's was a dive bar in Georgetown, the kind of place where blue-collar workers drank after long shifts and conversations were lost in the noise of pool games and jukebox music. An odd choice for a meeting between 2 successful businessmen, but Trevor had always fancied himself a man of the people. "I'll be there." After hanging up, Vince called his private investigator. "I need surveillance on the Fairmont Hotel tomorrow night, Suite 412. Full documentation of anyone entering or leaving." Trevor might think he was clever, arranging a meeting while presumably planning to spend the evening with Linda. But Vince had spent weeks learning Trevor's patterns, his habits, his weaknesses. Tomorrow night would be the beginning of Trevor's education about the difference between charm and power. Chapter 5. The Confrontation. McGillicuddy's reeked of stale beer and decades of cigarette smoke, even though smoking had been banned for years. Vince arrived 10 minutes early, choosing a corner booth with clear sight lines to all entrances. He nursed a bourbon and watched construction workers and dock laborers unwind from their shifts. Trevor arrived precisely at 8, his usual punctuality intact despite the chaos now surrounding his business. He traded his normal designer suits for jeans and a flannel shirt, playing dress-up as a common man. The affectation irritated Vince more than he'd expected. "Vince!" Trevor slid into the booth opposite him, his blue eyes scanning the room nervously. "Thanks for coming. You said we needed to talk." Trevor ordered a beer from the battered waitress, buying time to organize his thoughts. When she left, he leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "I know what's happening. The permit delays, the material mix-ups, the mysterious seismic review. You're sabotaging my project." Vince's expression remained neutral. "That's a serious accusation. Also completely unprovable. Cut the shit, Vince. We've known each other for 30 years. I know how your mind works, how methodical you are when someone crosses you. If someone had crossed me, I imagine I'd be quite methodical about addressing it." Trevor's jaw tightened. "Linda told me about the problems at home. Rebecca's house, the canceled payments. She's worried about you." The mention of Linda's name brought a cold smile to Vince's lips. "I'm sure she is. Tell me, Trevor, when Linda expresses these concerns about my mental state, is that before or after you two finish fucking in your hotel suite?" Trevor's face went ashen. For a moment, the confident charm that had carried him through life completely abandoned him. "I don't know what you think you know. I know everything." Vince pulled out his phone, swiping to a video file. The screen showed Trevor and Linda in passionate embrace outside the Fairmont Hotel, timestamp clear in the corner. "I know about your twice-weekly meetings. I know about your plans to relocate to Costa Rica after my divorce settlement funds your early retirement. I know about the fake identities your contacts have arranged." Trevor stared at the phone screen, watching his own betrayal play out in high definition. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to plan accordingly." "Vince, you have to understand." "No, Trevor, you have to understand. You made a choice to steal my wife. Linda made a choice to betray our marriage. My daughter made a choice to side with her mother based on lies. Each of you thought you could manipulate me, use me, discard me when convenient." Vince leaned back, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Now you all get to live with the consequences of those choices." Trevor's confidence was returning, the practiced charm reasserting itself. "Look, emotions are running high, but we can work this out. Linda isn't happy in your marriage, hasn't been for years. Maybe this is an opportunity for everyone to find what they really want." "What I really want," Vince said softly, "is to watch your world burn." "Jesus, Vince, listen to yourself. This isn't you. You're talking about destroying people's lives over a relationship that was already broken. My relationship wasn't broken. It was sabotaged by a man I considered a friend and a woman I trusted with everything I'd built." Trevor leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Okay, you're hurt. I get it. But think practically. Linda and I were good together, and you'll be better off without a marriage that was making everyone miserable. We can handle this like civilized adults. Civilized adults don't scheme to steal each other's spouses. They don't plan to flee the country with assets obtained through fraud." "Fraud? Vince, she's your wife. She's entitled to half of everything in a divorce." Vince smiled, and Trevor felt ice forming in his stomach. "Actually, she's entitled to half of the marital assets that exist at the time of divorce. Unfortunately, most of my wealth has been restructured in ways that place it well beyond any settlement claims." Trevor's beer sat untouched as the implications sank in. "You moved your assets offshore. I protected my business interests from potential threats. Perfectly legal, completely bulletproof. You bastard. You planned this whole thing. I responded to your actions. There's a difference." Trevor's composure finally cracked. "Fine. You want to play hardball? Linda's already filed for separation. Her attorney is very confident about piercing whatever asset protection schemes you've cooked up. Linda's attorney is welcome to try. I'm curious which one she hired. Brennan and Associates. Patricia Brennan herself." Vince nodded approvingly. "Patricia's very good. Expensive but effective. Of course, she'll need to be paid, and Linda doesn't have access to our joint accounts anymore. How is she covering the retainer?" Trevor's silence confirmed what Vince had suspected. "You're funding Linda's divorce attorney. That's generous of you. considering your own financial situation. My financial situation is fine. Is it? Because my sources suggest the Eastgate Commons delays are causing some cash flow problems. Penalty clauses, contractor cancellations, interest on bridge loans. How long can you sustain those losses while also paying for Linda's legal fees? Trevor stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Sit down, Trevor. I'm not finished. Something in Vince's tone made Trevor hesitate. The voice carried absolute authority, the kind of command that had directed construction crews through dangerous work sites. You wanted this meeting. You're going to hear what I came to say. Trevor sat slowly, his eyes never leaving Vince's face. Here's what's going to happen. Your Eastgate Commons project will fail. The seismic review will find serious structural flaws that actually exist in your design, flaws you should have caught if you weren't cutting corners to maximize profits. The resulting delays will trigger a cascade of contract failures and financial penalties that will bankrupt your company. You can't prove those flaws exist. I don't need to prove anything. I just need Dr. Antonio Rodriguez to find them during his review, which he will, because they're actually there. Trevor's face went pale. Rodriguez? You got Rodriguez involved. Linda will discover that I've made myself essentially judgment-proof. Her attorney will take whatever money you've given her and then decline to continue representation when it becomes clear there are no assets to pursue. At that point, she'll come crawling back, begging for reconciliation. And you'll take her back? I'll show her exactly the same mercy she showed me when she was planning her new life in Costa Rica. Vince stood, dropping a 20 on the table. Enjoy your evening, Trevor. I believe Linda is waiting for you at the Fairmont. Of course, you might want to consider whether you can still afford the suite, given your impending financial difficulties. He started to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Trevor? Tell Linda I said hello. Chapter 6, The Trap Springs. The next morning brought exactly the results Vince had anticipated. Rebecca called before 7 a.m., her voice thick with tears and desperation. Dad, something's wrong with Chad. He's been acting strange since yesterday, asking weird questions about our relationship, about long-term plans. His father called him last night, and they talked for 2 hours. Now Chad says we need to reassess our situation until things stabilize. Vince sipped his coffee, watching the sunrise paint Seattle's skyline in shades of gold and crimson. What sort of things need to stabilize? My living situation. The house payments. He says his family is concerned about our financial stability. The words came out in a rush, as if saying them quickly would lessen their sting. Vince could picture his daughter sitting in her powerless house, still in pajamas, her privileged world collapsing around her. And what did you tell him? I told him it was just a misunderstanding, that you'd fix everything. You will fix everything, won't you, Dad? I can't lose Chad. I can't lose the house. Everyone in my law firm is asking questions about why I gave an address where I can't actually live. Rebecca, do you remember what you texted me 3 weeks ago? Silence stretched across the line. You told me I wasn't invited to your celebration dinner because Mom said I couldn't be trusted. You chose to believe her lies over trusting the man who raised you, provided for you, loved you unconditionally for 23 years. Dad, I was confused. Mom made it sound like. Your mother made it sound like I was the problem. And you believed her without question. Just like you believed her when she told you I was being paranoid and controlling. I know I made a mistake. You made a choice, Rebecca. You chose sides. Unfortunately, you chose the wrong side. The call went silent except for Rebecca's muffled sobs. Dad, please. I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this. You can't fix betrayal, sweetheart. You can only live with the consequences. He hung up and immediately called his attorney. Harvey, it's time to file the divorce papers. Everything we discussed. Vince, are you sure? Once we file, there's no going back. Linda will know you've been planning this for weeks. She'll know I've been protecting myself from thieves and liars. File them today. 2 hours later, Vince received the call he'd been expecting from his private investigator. Mr. Marlowe, we've got a problem. Last night at the Fairmont, Linda never showed up. Our surveillance caught Trevor entering the suite alone around 9 p.m. He waited for 3 hours, made several phone calls, then left around midnight. From his body language, he was extremely agitated. Interesting. Any idea where Linda was? Actually, yes. She spent the evening at Patricia Brennan's law office. Came out around 11 p.m., carrying several boxes of documents. Our contact in the building says Brennan's been working around the clock on a rush case. Vince smiled. Linda had finally realized the game was afoot and was scrambling to protect herself. But her efforts were several weeks too late. His phone rang immediately, Linda's number. Vince, we need to talk. I'm coming home. I'll be here. Linda arrived 30 minutes later, her usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her makeup hastily applied, her hands shaking slightly as she entered his office. Vince, I know about the divorce papers. Patricia Brennan moves quickly. I'm impressed. This is insane. We can work things out. We've been married for 25 years. 25 years that apparently meant nothing to you. Linda's eyes filled with tears, or at least a performance of tears. I made mistakes. I got confused, lost sight of what was important. But we can fix this. Can we fix the 6 months you spent planning my humiliation? Can we fix the apartment in Costa Rica? The fake identities? The detailed discussions about liquidating my assets? Linda's face went white. How do you? I know everything, Linda. Every meeting, every plan, every lie you told our daughter to turn her against me. She collapsed into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair where she'd sat for countless evenings, playing the devoted wife while plotting his destruction. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Trevor and we just connected. The marriage has been dead for years, Vince. We've been going through the motions. Our marriage was fine until you decided to destroy it. Fine. Vince, you work 18-hour days. You're never here, never present, never emotionally available. I've been lonely for years. I worked 18-hour days to provide for this family. Every hour, every sacrifice, every deal I made was to give you and our children everything you wanted. Money isn't everything. It is when you're planning to steal it. Linda's tears dried up, replaced by a calculating hardness he'd never seen before. Patricia says, I'm entitled to half of everything. The house, the business, the investments. All of it. Patricia is welcome to pursue whatever she thinks she can get. But I think she'll find my assets are somewhat more complex than they appear. What does that mean? It means you should have thought about financial security before you started fucking my business rival. The crude language made Linda flinch. In 25 years of marriage, Vince had never spoken to her with such contempt. Patricia is very confident. Patricia is an excellent attorney who will take your money and deliver disappointing results. Because there's nothing for her to pursue. Linda stood, her composure cracking. You can't hide money forever, Vince. Courts have ways of finding hidden assets. I haven't hidden anything. I've legally restructured my holdings to protect them from potential creditors and claimants. Everything I've done is completely above board. You did this on purpose. You planned this whole thing. I responded to your betrayal appropriately. Linda's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went even paler. What's wrong? Vince asked, though he suspected he knew. Trevor, his project, there's some kind of problem with permits. The Eastgate Commons seismic review? Yes, I heard there were some concerns about structural integrity. Linda stared at him with dawning horror. You did this. You're destroying his business. Trevor's destroying his own business by cutting corners and ignoring safety regulations. I simply brought those oversights to the attention of appropriate authorities. This is insane. You're destroying people's lives over a relationship that wasn't working anyway. Vince stood, his full height and presence filling the room. I'm protecting myself from people who thought they could use me and discard me. The fact that consequences exist for betrayal seems to surprise everyone involved. Linda backed toward the door. This isn't over, Vince. Patricia will find that her client has no credible claim to assets that never belonged to the marital estate. She'll also find that her client's boyfriend can no longer afford to pay her retainer fees. Linda's hand was on the doorknob when Vince delivered his final blow. Oh, and Linda, you should probably find somewhere else to stay tonight. The locks have been changed. Chapter 7. The walls close in. Trevor Hamilton's world imploded with mathematical precision. Dr. Rodriguez's seismic review revealed not just the foundation flaws Vince had identified, but additional structural problems that Trevor's cost-cutting engineering had concealed. The city issued a stop-work order pending a complete redesign, a process that would take months and cost millions Trevor didn't have. Within 48 hours, 3 major subcontractors pulled out of the project, invoking safety clauses in their contracts. The general contractor followed, demanding immediate payment for work already completed. Trevor's construction lender froze all disbursements pending resolution of the permit issues. Vince watched the collapse from his office, monitoring industry reports with the satisfaction of an engineer whose calculations had proven flawless. His phone rang constantly, suppliers, subcontractors, and competitors calling to discuss acquiring distressed assets from Hamilton Construction's inevitable bankruptcy. But it was Miguel's call that brought the most interesting intelligence. Vince, my nephew Carlos, says Trevor's been making desperate phone calls all morning. To banks, investors, anyone who might provide emergency funding. No one's interested. What about his meeting with Linda? Carlos overheard part of it. Trevor told her the money's gone. Everything he'd set aside for their Costa Rica plan got invested in Eastgate Commons. Without that project's profits, he can't cover her legal fees, can't afford their hotel suite, can't maintain his lifestyle. How did she react? According to Carlos, she screamed at him for 10 minutes, called him a fraud and a failure, then stormed out. Haven't seen her since. Vince smiled. Linda was discovering that Trevor's charm became considerably less appealing when it wasn't backed by financial resources. His assistant buzzed the intercom. Mr. Marlowe, Rebecca is here to see you. She says it's urgent. Send her in. Rebecca entered looking haggard, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. She'd clearly been crying, her makeup smeared, her expensive clothes wrinkled as if she'd slept in them. Dad, I need to talk to you. I'm listening. Chad broke up with me this morning. He said his family can't be associated with financial instability and questionable business practices. His father told him I was a liability to his career. She collapsed into the chair across from his desk, the same chair where Linda had pleaded her case just days earlier. Dad, my life is falling apart. I can't live in a house because there's no power or water. I can't afford an apartment on my salary. Chad won't take my calls. Even my coworkers are treating me differently because I gave them an address where I obviously don't live. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Dad, I'm your daughter. I made a mistake, but I'm still your daughter. Vince studied her face, seeing echoes of the little girl who used to help him build birdhouses, but also recognizing the entitled woman who had cast him out based on lies. Rebecca, do you remember when you were 12 and you broke Mom's antique vase while playing with a football in the house? Dad, this isn't the time for... You blamed your brother Tommy. Said he threw the ball too hard. Said it was his fault for bringing the football inside. You let me punish him for something you did. Rebecca's face flushed. That was different. I was a kid. You were old enough to know right from wrong. And when I found out the truth, when Tommy finally told me what really happened, what did I say to you? Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. You said actions have consequences. And that lying about them makes the consequences worse. 23 years old, and you still haven't learned that lesson. Dad, please. I know I screwed up. I know I chose the wrong side. But I can't fix it if you won't let me. Some things can't be fixed, Rebecca. Some betrayals are permanent. So that's it. You're going to cut me out of your life forever because I believed Mom over you one time. I'm going to let you experience the consequences of your choices. Just like I'm letting your mother and Trevor experience the consequences of theirs. Rebecca stood, her voice rising with desperation. You're enjoying this. You're actually enjoying watching us suffer. I'm experiencing justice. There's a difference. This isn't justice, Dad. This is revenge. This is you punishing everyone who doesn't worship the ground you walk on. Vince's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a chill that made Rebecca step backward. I built everything you've ever known. This house, your education, your opportunities, your lifestyle, all of it came from my work, my sacrifice, my dedication to this family. And when your mother decided to throw it all away for a cheap affair, you sided with her based on lies. I said I was sorry. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust, Rebecca. Sorry doesn't undo betrayal. Sorry is just a word people use when they're facing consequences they don't like. Then what do you want from me? Nothing. I want nothing from you. The words hit Rebecca like physical blows. She stared at her father, seeing a stranger where once there had been unconditional love and support. Dad, you can't mean that. I can and I do. You made your choice. Now live with it. Rebecca fled from the office, her sobs echoing down the hallway. Vince turned back to his computer, where emails continued to arrive about Trevor's mounting business failures. His phone rang. Harvey Goldstein calling with an update. Vince, Patricia Brennan wants to meet. She's discovered the extent of your asset protection strategy and wants to discuss settlement terms. What kind of terms? Essentially, she's asking for mercy. Linda's situation is becoming untenable. No income, no assets, no housing. Brennan knows she can't touch her protected wealth, so she's hoping to negotiate some sort of spousal support agreement. Tell Patricia I'll consider meeting, but only if Linda demonstrates genuine accountability for her actions. What does that mean? It means she needs to provide a complete written confession of her affair, her plans to defraud me, and her role in turning our daughter against me. Signed, notarized, and submitted to the court record. Vince, that's essentially asking her to destroy any remaining credibility she might have in the divorce proceedings. That's exactly what I'm asking. And if she refuses, then she can experience poverty. I understand it builds character. After hanging up, Vince opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photographs Miguel had first shown him, the images that had started this campaign of justice. Linda embracing Trevor, planning their future with money stolen from the man who had given her everything. His intercom buzzed again. Mr. Marlowe, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says his name is Tommy Marlowe. Vince's heart stopped. Tommy wasn't due back from overseas for another 6 weeks. Send him in. The door opened to reveal Vince's son in dress uniform, his young face grim with purpose. At 19, Tommy had inherited his father's height and broad shoulders, but his eyes held a maturity that came from months in active deployment. Dad, Tommy, you're early. Emergency leave. Rebecca called me. Cry about some family crisis. Took me 3 days to get transport back to the States. Tommy closed the door behind him and stood at attention. Dad, I need to know what the hell is going on. Chapter 8, Blood and Judgment. Tommy had always been different from Rebecca, where she craved luxury and attention. He sought purpose and structure. At 17, he'd shocked the family by enlisting rather than accepting his guaranteed spot at the University of Washington. Vince had been secretly proud. The military would teach Tommy lessons about honor and consequence that no amount of privilege could provide. Sit down, son. Tommy remained standing, his military bearing rigid. Rebecca says you've cut off all financial support. Says mom's filed for divorce and is living in some cheap motel. Says her boyfriend dumped her and she can't afford an apartment. All of that is accurate. She also says you've lost your mind, that you're destroying the family over some paranoid delusions about mom cheating. Vince opened his desk drawer and pulled out the manila envelope Miguel had given him months earlier. He spread the photographs across his desk, clear images of Linda and Trevor's affair. Tommy's military composure cracked as he studied each photo, the timestamps, the undeniable evidence of his mother's betrayal. Jesus Christ. There's more. Vince activated his computer, playing audio recordings from the private investigator's surveillance. Linda's voice filled the office. Once the divorce is final, we'll have enough from Vince's assets to start fresh in Costa Rica. Tommy listened to his mother plan her husband's financial destruction with the clinical attention he'd learned analyzing enemy intelligence overseas. When the recordings finished, Tommy finally sat down, his face pale, but his jaw set with familiar determination. How long have you known? For months. Why didn't you tell me? Because you were serving your country. Because you shouldn't have to choose between your parents. Because I wanted to handle this myself. Tommy nodded slowly. Rebecca said you're being cruel, that you're punishing her for taking mom's side. I'm letting everyone experience the consequences of their choices. What were Rebecca's choices? Vince explained the dinner invitation, the text message, the systematic exclusion based on Linda's lies. Tommy listened without interruption, his expression growing harder with each detail. She chose Mom over you without even asking for your side of the story. Yes. And now she wants you to fix everything because her boyfriend dumped her and she can't afford a lifestyle. Yes. Tommy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Seattle skyline his father had helped build. After several minutes of silence, he turned back. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Go ahead. Are you doing this for justice or for revenge? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Vince considered his answer carefully, knowing that his relationship with his son, the only family member who had remained loyal, depended on his honesty. Both, he said finally. I'm ensuring that people who betrayed me face appropriate consequences. Whether you call that justice or revenge depends on your perspective. And you're comfortable with that? I'm comfortable with the fact that actions have consequences. I'm comfortable with the fact that betrayal shouldn't be rewarded. I'm comfortable with protecting myself from people who try to use and discard me. Tommy nodded slowly. What about mercy? What about forgiveness? Tommy, if an enemy soldier shot one of your buddies and then asked for mercy, what would you do? I'd neutralize the threat. Your mother and sister shot me in the back, son, metaphorically speaking. Then they asked for mercy when they realized I was still alive and capable of fighting back. And Trevor's a casualty of war. He chose to involve himself in someone else's family. He chose to steal another man's wife and plot that man's destruction. Now he's learning that some men fight back. Tommy was quiet for several minutes, processing everything he'd learned. Finally, he spoke. What do you need from me? Nothing. You've served your country with honor. You don't need to be involved in this. Dad, you're my father. Rebecca's my sister, even if she's made terrible choices. Mom's my mother, even if she's betrayed you. I can't just pretend none of this is happening. What are you suggesting? Let me talk to Rebecca. Let me try to make her understand the magnitude of what she did. Maybe if it comes from me. Vince considered the proposal. Tommy had always been Rebecca's protector, the brother who looked out for her despite their different personalities. If anyone could break through her sense of entitlement, it might be him. And if she doesn't listen, then she lives with the consequences, just like you said. What about your mother? Tommy's expression hardened. Mom made her choices. She chose another man over our family. She chose to lie and manipulate and plan your destruction. As far as I'm concerned, she's dead to me. The words carried the finality of a military execution order. Vince felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride that his son understood honor and loyalty. Sadness that his family had been reduced to this stark calculation of allegiance and betrayal. Tommy, I want you to understand something. What I'm doing to your mother and Trevor, it's not just about the affair. It's about the systematic planning, the lies, the manipulation, the attempt to turn you and Rebecca against me while stealing everything I'd built. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a calculated campaign of destruction. I understand, Dad. And honestly, in the Army, we call that enemy action. You respond to enemy action with overwhelming force. Are you comfortable with that? I'm comfortable with the fact that you trusted your family and they betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. I'm comfortable with the fact that actions have consequences, especially for people who should know better. Vince studied his son's face, seeing the man he'd become during months of overseas deployment. The boy who'd left home was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the world could be brutal and that survival sometimes required brutal responses. All right, talk to Rebecca. But Tommy, if she rejects your counsel, if she continues to blame me for the consequences of her own choices, then she's on her own. Understood. Tommy stood and headed for the door, then turned back. Dad, for what it's worth, I think Mom and Rebecca forgot something important about you. What's that? You didn't build this empire by being weak. You didn't succeed in construction by letting people walk over you. They thought they could manipulate you because you love them. They forgot that love has limits, and that even good men have breaking points. And Trevor, Tommy's smile was cold as winter wind. Trevor never knew you at all. He's about to get an education. Chapter 9. The Reckoning Complete. 3 days later, Tommy sat across from Rebecca in a downtown coffee shop, watching his sister pick at a muffin she couldn't afford. Her appearance had deteriorated further. Designer clothes that now looked desperate rather than elegant. Makeup that couldn't hide the stress lines forming around her eyes. Tommy, thank God you're here. Maybe you can talk sense into Dad. He's completely lost his mind. I've seen the evidence, Rebecca. Photos, recordings, financial documents. Mom wasn't just cheating. She was planning to destroy Dad financially and disappear to another country. Rebecca's face crumpled. That doesn't mean he has to destroy our whole family. Our family was already destroyed. Mom destroyed it when she decided to fuck Trevor Hamilton and plot Dad's humiliation. The crude language made Rebecca flinch, but Tommy's expression remained hard. You destroyed it when you chose to believe her lies over trusting the man who gave you everything. I made a mistake. You made a choice. A choice to exclude Dad from your celebration based on accusations you never bothered to verify. A choice to side with someone who was actively betraying him. Tommy, I was confused. Mom made it sound like Dad was being paranoid and controlling. And you believed her. Without question. Without talking to Dad. Without considering that maybe the woman planning to flee the country with another man's money might not be the most reliable source of information. Rebecca started crying again, but Tommy didn't soften his expression. Rebecca, do you know what we call it in the Army when someone betrays their unit? What? Treason. And do you know what the penalty for treason is? She shook her head. Execution. Dad's not executing you. He's just cutting you out of his life. Considering what you did, that's mercy. This is insane. He's my father. I'm his daughter. Families forgive each other. Families support each other. Families trust each other. Families don't cast each other out based on lies from cheating spouses. Tommy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Rebecca, I've spent 8 months in a combat zone. I've seen what happens when people you trust betray that trust. I've seen good soldiers die because someone they counted on chose the wrong side. This isn't a war zone, Tommy. Isn't it? Mom declared war on Dad when she started fucking his business rival. You chose sides when you believed her lies. Now you're experiencing what happens to people who pick the losing side. Rebecca wiped her eyes with a napkin. So that's it? Dad's never going to forgive me. I don't know. Maybe. But forgiveness has to be earned, and you haven't even acknowledged the magnitude of what you did. I said I was sorry. Sorry isn't enough. Sorry is what you say when you accidentally break something. This wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate choice to side against your father based on lies from a woman who was actively betraying him. Tommy pulled out his phone and showed Rebecca a photo. Their father at a construction site, covered in concrete dust, his face lined with exhaustion. This is how Dad looked last week. 52 years old, working 16-hour days to build something lasting for his family. While he was breaking his back to provide for us, Mom was planning his destruction, and you were helping her exclude him from family events. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. It was easier to believe Mom's version because it didn't require you to question anything or make hard choices. Rebecca stared at the photo, really seeing her father's exhaustion for the first time. What do I have to do? First, you have to understand that Dad doesn't owe you anything. Not forgiveness, not financial support, not a relationship. You burned that bridge. Okay. Second, you have to accept that your lifestyle is over. No more house you can't afford. No more expensive clothes. No more boyfriend whose family sees you as a liability. You're going to have to build your own life from scratch. I can't afford. Then you'll learn to live within your means. Dad started with nothing and built an empire. You can start with nothing and build a life. Tommy stood to leave, then turned back. Rebecca, if you genuinely want a chance at reconciliation, you need to prove you understand what you did wrong and that you're willing to accept responsibility for your choices. Not sorry because you got caught responsibility. Real acknowledgement of the magnitude of your betrayal. How do I do that? Figure it out. Dad doesn't owe you a roadmap to forgiveness. That same evening, Vince received a call from Patricia Brennan. Mr. Marlowe, my client would like to discuss the terms you outlined. The written confession? Yes. She's prepared to provide a complete statement acknowledging her affair and her planning activities. In exchange for what? Modest spousal support. Enough to secure basic housing and transportation. Vince considered the offer. Linda's complete humiliation was within reach. a signed confession that would destroy any remaining credibility she might have in social or legal circles. I'll consider it, but the confession has to be complete. Every detail of the affair, every aspect of the financial planning, every lie she told about me. And she has to acknowledge that she manipulated our daughter as part of her scheme. Mr. Marlowe, that level of detail would be devastating to her reputation. Patricia, your client tried to destroy my family and steal my life's work. Her reputation is the least of my concerns. 2 days later, Linda sat in Patricia Brennan's office, signing a 12-page confession that detailed her infidelity, her planning with Trevor, and her systematic manipulation of their daughter. Each signature felt like cutting away another piece of her dignity. "This will haunt me forever," she said as she finished the last page. "Mrs. Marlowe, your husband could have left you with nothing. This arrangement gives you a chance to rebuild your life." Linda looked up, her eyes hollow. "What life? Trevor's bankrupt. My daughter won't speak to me. My son considers me dead. My reputation is destroyed. You'll have enough money to start over somewhere else." Start over as what? A 50-year-old woman with no job skills and a documented history of infidelity and fraud? Patricia had no answer. Meanwhile, Trevor Hamilton sat in his nearly empty office, watching movers take away the last of his furniture. Hamilton Construction was finished. Bankruptcy proceedings had begun, assets were being liquidated, and his reputation in the construction industry was permanently destroyed. His phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed Vince Marlowe. "Trevor." "Vince, come to gloat. Actually, I called to thank you." "Thank me? You taught me something valuable about the people I thought I could trust. You showed me that even 25 years of marriage and fatherhood weren't enough to earn genuine loyalty from my family." "Vince, you destroyed everything. My business, Linda's life, Rebecca's future. Was it worth it?" "Trevor, you destroyed my family when you decided to steal my wife. I just made sure there were consequences for that choice. You're a cold bastard. I'm a man who protects what he builds. You should have remembered that before you try to tear it down." The line went dead. 6 months later, Vince Marlowe stood on the observation deck of his newest tower, watching the Seattle skyline stretch toward distant mountains. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy, now stationed in Colorado. "Proud of you, Dad. You handled this like a man." Rebecca had sent exactly one message in the past 3 months. "I understand now what I did to you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know I understand." He hadn't replied. Linda had moved to Portland, living in a modest apartment on the spousal support payments that would continue for exactly 5 years. Enough time, he decided, for her to learn how to support herself. Trevor had left Seattle entirely, his whereabouts unknown. Vince's construction empire continued to grow. His reputation for ruthless competence had only been enhanced by the systematic destruction of those who had betrayed him. Competitors now approached him with deeper respect, understanding that Vincent Marlowe was not a man to be crossed. He pulled out his phone and looked at a photo Miguel had sent him. A family barbecue, 3 generations gathered around picnic tables, children playing in the background. The caption read, "This is what loyalty looks like." Vince smiled and pocketed the phone. He'd lost a family, but he'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that he would never again allow sentiment to cloud his judgment about people's true nature. In the distance, construction cranes moved like mechanical prayers against the evening sky, building new structures on foundations of steel and uncompromising strength. Some things once broken could never be repaired, but a man of strength could always build something. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The November rain drummed against the windows of William Sullivan's photography studio in Portland, creating a rhythm that usually soothed him during late editing sessions. At 32, Williams had built his business from nothing, a one-man operation specializing in documentary photography that had earned him modest recognition in artistic circles. His lean frame hunched over the computer, fingers dancing across the keyboard as he color-corrected images from a recent exhibition opening. His phone buzzed. Daryl Hoffman, his older brother by 4 years. "Will, hey. Listen, I know it's last minute, but Carly and I need a huge favor." Daryl's voice carried that particular tone of desperation Williams had learned to recognize over the years. "Can you watch baby Elmer for a few hours? We have to pick up the crib we ordered, and the store closes at 6. It's across town and with traffic." Williams glanced at the clock. 3:30. He had a client meeting at 7, but that left time. "Yeah, sure. Bring him over. You're a lifesaver. We'll be there in 20. Williams saved his work and tidied the studio's front room, moving light stands and clearing space on the vintage leather couch he'd salvaged from an estate sale. His relationship with Daryl had always been complicated, a mixture of brotherly affection and unspoken resentment that neither fully acknowledged. Daryl had followed their father into accounting, married his college sweetheart Carly Barajas, and produced the family's first grandchild with mechanical efficiency. Meanwhile, Williams had disappointed their late father by choosing art over stability, a choice he'd never regretted even as it drove a wedge between them. Their father had died 2 years ago without ever seeing Williams's work displayed in a gallery. That wound still ached. 20 minutes later, Daryl's silver SUV pulled up outside. Williams met them at the door. Carly emerged first, her auburn hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes broadcasting her exhaustion. She'd been a vibrant presence in their family gatherings before Elmer's birth. Quick-witted, warm, always the first to laugh. Now she looked hollowed out, moving with the mechanical precision of the chronically sleep-deprived. "Thank you so much, Will," she said, transferring the infant carrier into his arms without meeting his eyes. "He just ate, so he should be fine for a while. Diapers and wipes are in the bag. We'll be back by 6 at the latest." Daryl clapped Williams on the shoulder, that familiar gesture that somehow always felt patronizing. "Appreciate it, little brother. You're getting a preview of parenthood." He laughed, but sounded forced. Williams noticed how neither of them really looked at the baby. How Carly's hands shook slightly as she handed over the diaper bag. How Daryl kept checking his watch despite having just arrived. "Everything okay with you guys?" Williams asked. Fine. Just tired. You know how it is with newborns." Daryl was already backing toward the car. "We'll text when we're heading back." They left before Williams could ask anything else. He carried 2-month-old Elmer inside, setting the carrier on the cleared couch. The baby slept, his tiny features peaceful, one small fist curled near his mouth. Williams felt that universal human response to infants, protective, awed by their fragility. He'd photographed dozens of newborns for clients, but this was different. This was family blood. His nephew. Williams returned to his editing, checking on Elmer every few minutes. The studio's quiet suited him. No assistants, no partners, just his craft and the stories he tried to capture through his lens. His recent project documented Portland's disappearing working-class neighborhoods, families being priced out by development. The work was personal, political, and unlikely to pay his rent, but it mattered. Around 4:30, Elmer woke crying. Williams scooped him up, supporting the tiny head the way Carly had shown him months ago at the hospital. "Hey there, little man. You're okay." But Elmer wasn't okay. The crying intensified, a sharp wail that escalated into something that sounded almost like pain. Williams walked him around the studio, bouncing gently, trying the soothing techniques he'd seen parents use. The crying continued, growing more desperate. "Come on, buddy. What's wrong?" Williams checked the time. Only an hour since he'd eaten. Could he be hungry again? Williams knew nothing about feeding schedules. He tried everything: walking, rocking, gentle patting. Elmer's face turned red, his tiny body rigid with distress. This wasn't normal crying. Something was genuinely wrong. Williams laid him back in the carrier, talking softly as he checked for obvious problems. Maybe the carrier straps were too tight? He loosened them. Elmer's crying never stopped, and now Williams noticed how the baby's legs seemed to pull up toward his stomach, like he was in pain. Okay. Let me check your diaper." Williams unbuttoned the blue onesie with trembling fingers. He'd never been great with babies, always afraid of doing something wrong. He pulled aside the diaper and froze. Time seemed to stop. The rain against the windows faded. Elmer's crying became distant. All of Williams's attention focused on what he was seeing, and his mind struggled to process it, rejecting it even as his eyes transmitted the information. Bruises. Dark purple and yellow bruises covering the baby's inner thighs and lower abdomen. Not the kind from a fall or accident. These were fingerprint-shaped. Small adult fingers pressed into tender infant skin with enough force to leave marks that had aged through several stages of healing. Williams's hands began to shake. His stomach lurched. Professional instinct from years of documentary work kicked in. Evidence documentation. He grabbed his phone and photographed what he saw, his photographer's eye automatically adjusting angles for clarity even as his mind screamed. Someone had hurt this baby. Someone had held him hard enough to bruise. Multiple times, given the different stages of discoloration. And Daryl and Carly had left so quickly. Neither had looked at Elmer. Carly shaking hands. Daryl's forced laugh. "Oh God," Williams whispered. "Oh God, no." He refastened the diaper with shaking hands, wrapped Elmer in the carrier blanket, and grabbed his keys. The baby's crying had subsided into exhausted whimpers. Williams's mind raced as he locked the studio and carried Elmer to his old Jeep. Emergency room. He needed to get Elmer to an emergency room. Now. But as he started the engine, his phone buzzed. A text from Daryl. "Traffic is worse than we thought. Might be closer to 7. Hope he's being good." Williams stared at the message. 7 o'clock. 3 more hours they'd planned to stay away. Long enough that Williams might not have noticed anything wrong. Might have just handed Elmer back when they returned. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. All the complicated feelings about his brother, the resentment, the distance, the unspoken competition, crystallized into something clear and cold. If Daryl or Carly had done this, Williams would make them pay. Family or not, blood or not, whoever had hurt this innocent child would face consequences. But first, Elmer needed help. Williams drove through the rain toward Providence Portland Medical Center, his nephew whimpering softly in the back seat. His mind was already working, analyzing, planning. Years of documentary photography had taught him to see what others missed, to capture truth even when people try to hide it. He'd exposed corruption, abuse, and injustice through his camera. Now he'd use those same skills to protect Elmer and find out who had done this. The rain intensified as he drove, and Williams felt something hardening inside him. A determination he'd only experienced once before, when he decided to pursue photography, despite his father's disapproval. That same certainty that he was doing the right thing, regardless of cost. He'd always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and avoided confrontation. Not anymore. Whatever came next, Williams was ready. The emergency room of Providence Portland buzzed with controlled chaos. Nurses moving between curtained areas, monitors beeping, the antiseptic smell mixing with wet clothes and stress. Williams stood at the triage desk, Elmer's carrier clutched in both hands, trying to keep his voice steady. "I need someone to examine my nephew. I found bruises. I think someone might have hurt him." The triage nurse, a woman in her 50s with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, immediately called for a doctor. Within minutes, Williams found himself in a private examination room with Dr. Kelvin Gallagher, a pediatrician who looked barely 30 but moved with practiced confidence. "I'm going to examine him now," Dr. Gallagher said gently, lifting Elmer from the carrier. "Can you tell me exactly what you observed?" Williams explained, showing the photos on his phone. Dr. Gallagher's expression remained professionally neutral, but Williams saw his jaw tighten. The examination took 20 minutes. Dr. Gallagher worked carefully, documenting everything, his gloved hands gentle as Elmer fussed and cried. Finally, he looked up at Williams. "You did the right thing bringing him in. These are definitely non-accidental injuries. Multiple contusions in various stages of healing, indicating repeated trauma." He paused. "I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police." Do you understand? Williams nodded, his throat tight. His parents, my brother and his wife, they asked me to babysit a few hours ago. They seemed off, rushed. They didn't look at him. Where are they now? Shopping. They said they'd be back around 7. Dr. Gallagher made notes on his tablet. The police will want to speak with you, and likely with the parents when they return. For now, Elmer will be admitted for observation and a complete medical workup. We need to ensure there aren't other injuries. A social worker arrived, Wendy Barnett, introduced herself with a kind but weary expression. She'd seen cases like this before, Williams could tell. Probably saw them all the time. Mr. Sullivan, I know this is difficult, Wendy said as they sat in a small consultation room. Can you walk me through everything from the beginning? Williams recounted the afternoon, every detail he could remember. Daryl's call, their rushed handoff, the way they'd avoided looking at Elmer. Wendy took notes, asked clarifying questions, never showing judgment, but clearly building a timeline. Have you observed anything concerning about your brother or sister-in-law's behavior before today? She asked. Williams thought back. I haven't seen them much since Elmer was born. Maybe 3 times? They seemed stressed, tired, but I thought that was normal new parent stuff. He paused. Carly was different, though. Before the baby, she was lighter, happy. After Elmer came, she seemed almost scared of him. Scared how? Like she didn't want to hold him. At the hospital, when we all visited, she barely looked at him. I thought it might be postpartum depression or something. Wendy nodded. That's helpful information. The police detective will want to hear all of this as well. Detective Andre Hendricks arrived an hour later. A solid man in his mid-40s with graying temples and the patient demeanor of someone who'd worked difficult cases too long. He recorded Williams's statement, examined the photos, and consulted with Dr. Gallagher. We'll need to interview the parents when they arrive, Detective Hendricks said. In the meantime, an emergency custody order has been issued. Elmer won't be going home with them tonight. Williams's phone buzzed. Daryl, got the crib. Heading to grab dinner, then we'll swing by around 7:30, if that's cool. Looking at the message, Williams felt anger burning in his chest. They were having dinner while their son lay in a hospital with bruises they'd somehow failed to notice, or worse, had caused. He showed the message to Detective Hendricks, who nodded. Don't respond yet. We'll handle this carefully. Williams sat in the waiting area, his mind churning. A few hours ago, his biggest concern had been finishing a color correction. Now his family was imploding, his nephew was hospitalized, and he was at the center of an abuse investigation. But underneath the shock and anger, Williams felt something else. Purpose. Clarity. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't let Elmer get hurt again. He'd protect this kid with everything he had. At 7:40, Daryl and Carly walked into the emergency room, looking confused. Williams stood, and Daryl's expression shifted from confusion to concern. Will? What's going on? Why are you? Where's Elmer? Detective Hendricks stepped forward, badge out. Mr. and Mrs. Hoffman? I'm Detective Hendricks with Portland PD. I need to speak with both of you about your son. Carly's face went white. Daryl's confusion deepened. What? Why? What happened? Your son was brought in with injuries consistent with physical abuse. We need to ask you some questions. The next hour unfolded like a nightmare. Daryl and Carly were separated, interviewed individually. Williams watched from a distance as his brother's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like genuine confusion. Carly dissolved into tears almost immediately. Detective Hendricks returned to Williams. Neither is admitting to anything. Both seem shocked, but that's not unusual in these cases. Do you think they did it? Williams asked. I think we need to investigate thoroughly. In the meantime, Elmer needs a temporary placement. Given that you discovered the abuse and brought him in, and that your family, would you be willing to serve as an emergency foster placement? Williams didn't hesitate. Yes, absolutely. Paperwork followed, forms, background checks expedited through the system, a home inspection scheduled for the next day. Through it all, Williams kept thinking about those bruises, about Elmer's desperate crying, about how close he'd come to just handing the baby back without ever knowing. Near midnight, exhausted and overwhelmed, Williams sat in Elmer's hospital room watching the baby sleep in the clear bassinet. The injuries had been photographed, documented, and measured. Blood work had been drawn. A skeletal survey would happen tomorrow to check for fractures. His phone buzzed. Daryl, from a number Williams didn't recognize. How could you do this? Call CPS on your own brother? We didn't do anything to him. Williams stared at the message. Part of him wanted to believe Daryl. Family loyalty ran deep, and his brother had never shown any signs of violence. But the evidence didn't lie. Those bruises came from somewhere. He typed back, "Then who did, Daryl? Who hurt him?" The response came quickly. "I don't know, but it wasn't us. You've destroyed our family over a misunderstanding." Williams didn't reply. Tomorrow he'd need to prepare his studio apartment for a baby, buy supplies, figure out how to care for an infant while the investigation unfolded. Tonight, he just sat watching Elmer sleep and made a silent promise. No matter who had done this, brother, sister-in-law, or someone else entirely, Williams would find out. And they would pay for every bruise, every moment of pain inflicted on this innocent child. The rain had stopped outside. Through the hospital window, Williams could see the city lights reflecting off wet pavement. Somewhere out there, someone had answers. Someone knew the truth. William Sullivan had spent his career exposing hidden truths through photography. Now he'd use every skill he possessed to expose this one. The game had begun, and he wouldn't stop until Elmer was safe and justice was served. The home inspection happened at 10 the next morning. Williams had spent the pre-dawn hours baby-proofing his studio apartment, a converted warehouse space he'd lived in for 5 years. The social worker, Wendy Barnett, walked through methodically, checking outlets, cabinet locks, and asking questions about his work schedule and support system. "You understand this is temporary?" Wendy asked, making notes on her tablet. "Until the investigation concludes." "I understand, but I'm prepared for however long Elmer needs to be here." She approved the placement. By noon, Williams was back at the hospital, receiving instructions from nurses on feeding schedules, safe sleep practices, and warning signs to watch for. Dr. Gallagher pulled him aside. The skeletal survey came back. No fractures, which is good, but we found something else. He pulled up images on his computer. "See these? Retinal hemorrhages in both eyes. Consistent with shaken baby syndrome." Williams felt his stomach drop. Someone shook him. The pattern of injuries suggests it. The bruising, the retinal hemorrhages, classic presentation. Whoever did this grabbed him hard enough to bruise and shook him violently enough to cause bleeding in his eyes. Will he be okay? Physically, yes. He's young enough that with proper care, he should heal completely. But we'll need follow-up exams. Dr. Gallagher's expression hardened. "Whoever did this could have killed him, Mr. Sullivan. Shaken baby syndrome can cause permanent brain damage or death. Elmer was lucky you found him when you did." Lucky. Williams thought about that word as he drove Elmer back to the studio that afternoon, a car seat borrowed from the hospital secured in the back. Lucky seemed like the wrong word for a baby who'd been violently abused. But maybe lucky that his uncle had cared enough to look, to act, to protect him. The next days blurred together. Williams learned to function on broken sleep, to decipher different types of cries, to change diapers and warm bottles at 3 in the morning. His photography work suffered. He postponed the client meeting, put projects on hold, and stopped returning calls from everyone except Detective Hendricks. The investigation was moving slowly. Daryl and Carly had lawyered up, both maintaining their innocence. Their attorney, a sharp woman named Petra Todd, had issued a statement claiming the injuries were accidental, that babies bruise easily, that the whole thing was a tragic misunderstanding. Williams didn't believe it for a second. On the 4th day, Detective Hendricks visited the studio. Williams had just gotten Elmer down for a nap and was staring at his computer screen, trying to make sense of the half-finished editing work that now seemed meaningless. "Got a few minutes?" Hendricks asked, accepting Williams's offer of coffee. They sat in the studio's kitchen area, a small space Williams had carved out with a vintage table and mismatched chairs. Hendricks laid out photos from the investigation. Crime scene photos from Daryl and Carly's house, medical reports, interview transcripts. "We executed a search warrant on their home," Hendricks said. "Found some interesting things. First, their neighbor, a woman named Lily Stewart. reported hearing a baby crying intensely several nights over the past month, sometimes for hours. She almost called the police twice, but didn't want to interfere. Williams's jaw clenched. Hours. Her statement says the crying sounded distressed, different from normal baby crying. Hendricks pulled out more photos. We also found damage to the nursery wall. Small dent, about fist-sized, with paint chips on the carpet. Recent, based on the condition. Someone punched the wall, or threw something at it. We're waiting on forensics. Hendricks leaned back. Here's where it gets complicated. Daryl's story checks out for most of the timeline. He works long hours at his accounting firm, 50, 60 hours a week. Multiple colleagues confirm he's been there late most nights since Elmer was born. His time card supported. So he wasn't home when it happened? Probably not. Which brings us to Carly. Hendricks's expression grew troubled. She's a different story. Quit her job as a graphic designer when Elmer was born. Stays home full-time. No family nearby. Few friends. Her social media went dark after the birth. She used to post constantly. Now nothing for 2 months. Williams thought about Carly at family gatherings before Elmer. Vibrant, engaged, always the life of the party. Then he thought about her hollow eyes and shaking hands when she dropped Elmer off. You think she did it? I think she had the most opportunity. But she's not talking, and without a confession or witness, it's hard to prove. Hendricks paused. There's something else. Medical records show Carly was treated for postpartum depression 6 weeks ago. Prescribed medication she never filled. Her OB recommended therapy she never attended. Why wouldn't she get help? Shame, maybe fear. Or Daryl didn't believe she needed it. Hendricks gathered his photos. I've worked child abuse cases for 15 years, Williams. This is all the hallmarks of a parent who's overwhelmed, isolated, and not coping. Someone who snapped. After Hendricks left, Williams stood at the window, watching rain start up again. Below, Portland's streets glistened, people hurrying with umbrellas. Normal life continuing while his nephew fought to heal from violence that should never have happened. His phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Will. Carly's voice, thin and desperate. Please, I need to talk to you. Carly, I don't think. I didn't hurt him. I swear to God, I would never hurt my baby. But nobody believes me, and Daryl won't even look at me. And I need someone to listen. Williams closed his eyes. Every instinct screamed not to engage. But something in her voice, raw terror and grief, made him pause. Talk, he said quietly. Can we meet? Just 15 minutes? I'm not supposed to contact you, but I don't care anymore. I need you to understand. She was crying now. Please, Will. You're the only one who might believe me. Against his better judgment, Williams agreed. They met an hour later at a coffee shop near his studio. Carly looked terrible. Unwashed hair, clothes hanging loose on her frame, eyes red and swollen. She'd aged 10 years in 2 months. They sat in a back corner. Carly wrapped her hands around a cup of tea she didn't drink. I love being pregnant, she said softly. Everyone talks about how hard it is, but I loved it. Felt connected to this little life growing inside me. Felt like I finally understood my purpose, you know? William said nothing, just listened. Then Elmer was born, and it was like a switch flipped. I couldn't bond with him. Couldn't feel anything except fear and exhaustion. He cried all the time, and I couldn't figure out what he needed, and Daryl kept saying I was doing it wrong. Her voice cracked. I thought I was losing my mind. Did you shake him, Carly? No. I swear on everything I am, I never shook him. Never grabbed him hard enough to bruise. I was terrified of hurting him, so scared that I'd do something wrong that I barely wanted to touch him. Then how do you explain the injuries? Carly's hands trembled around the cup. That's what I need to tell you. There's someone else. Someone who was there when Daryl wasn't. Williams leaned forward. Who? Daryl's mother. Glenda Grant. The name hit Williams like cold water. Glenda Grant. Daryl's mother from his father's first marriage. Williams's father had divorced Glenda when Daryl was 8, before Williams was even born. Williams had met her maybe 5 times in his life, always at awkward family events where she glared daggers at Williams's own mother. Glenda was helping you with Elmer? Daryl insisted. Said I needed help, that his mom raised him fine and could teach me. She started coming over every day while he was at work. Carly's voice dropped to almost a whisper. She hated me, Will. Always has. Thought Daryl married beneath him. And when Elmer came, what happened? She criticized everything I did. Said I was holding him wrong, feeding him wrong, not being strict enough. She kept saying babies need discipline, that crying is manipulation. I tried to tell Daryl, but he said I was being paranoid, that his mother was just old-fashioned. Williams's mind raced. Glenda Grant. He remembered her from his father's funeral. A bitter woman in her 60s who'd spent the entire service making snide comments about Williams's mother and the real family she'd replaced. Did you see her hurt Elmer? Not directly, but there were nights after she'd been there when he'd cried differently. When I'd change him and see marks. I asked her about it once, and she said I was imagining things that babies bruise from being picked up wrong. Carly finally met his eyes. I should have said something. Should have made Daryl listen. But I was so exhausted, so confused, and she made me feel crazy. Why didn't you tell the police this? I did, but they say I'm trying to shift blame. Petra, our lawyer, she says without evidence, it just makes me look worse. Like I'm making up stories. Fresh tears spilled down Carly's cheeks. I failed my son, Will. Even if I didn't hurt him physically, I failed to protect him. I'll live with that forever. But I need you to know I didn't do it. And I need you to help me prove who did. William sat back, mind working through the angles. Glenda Grant, a bitter woman with access and opportunity. A grandmother from a different generation with toxic ideas about discipline. It fit, but could he prove it? Where is she now? Williams asked. Her house in Beaverton. Daryl won't talk to her either. The investigation scared her off. But she's out there, free, while I'm losing everything. Williams made a decision. I'll look into it. But Carly, if you're lying to me. I'm not. I swear. She grabbed his hand across the table. Thank you for at least listening. That's more than anyone else has done. After Carly left, Williams sat alone with his thoughts. Could he trust her? Or was this exactly what a guilty person would do? Create doubt, point fingers elsewhere? He needed more information, and he knew exactly how to get it. That night, after putting Elmer to bed, Williams opened his laptop and did what he did best, research. He dug into Glenda Grant's background, social media, anything he could find. What he discovered was illuminating. Glenda had been married 3 times, Williams's father being husband number 2. She'd had 5 children total, Daryl from her first marriage, then 2 daughters from the second marriage who'd both moved across the country and cut contact years ago. Public records showed she'd been investigated by CPS twice in the 80s when her daughters were young, though no charges were ever filed. Williams found archived newspaper articles about one of the investigations. Neighbors had reported hearing children crying, seeing bruises. Nothing had been proven, but the pattern was there. He went deeper, finding old blog posts Glenda had written under a pseudonym about parenting. The content was disturbing. Screeds about modern parents being too soft, children needing firm hands and real discipline, babies being manipulative. She ranted about permissive parenting ruining society, how her generation knew how to raise children properly. The blog had comments from people challenging her views, calling her abusive. She'd responded with fury, doubling down on her beliefs. Williams took screenshots of everything, building a file. Then he did something that crossed a legal line, but felt necessary. He pulled up Glenda's address and started planning surveillance. If she'd hurt Elmer, he'd prove it. And when he did, she'd pay. Not just legal consequences. Williams wanted more than that. He wanted her to feel what Elmer had felt. Helpless, hurt, terrified. He wanted her to understand the weight of her crimes in a way that went beyond a courtroom. The photographer in him knew how to watch, how to wait, how to capture the truth when people thought no one was looking. He'd use those skills now, not for art, but for justice. Over the next week, Williams established a routine. Mornings with Elmer, feeding, playing, doctor's appointments to track his healing. Afternoons reviewing footage from the camera he'd set up outside Glenda's house, a small device hidden in his car that he parked strategically down her street. What he saw disturbed him. Glenda lived alone in a rundown 2-story house, her yard overgrown, curtains drawn. She rarely left, and when she did, her expression was hard, angry at the world. But on the third day of surveillance, Williams hit gold. A visitor arrived at Glenda's house, a woman in her late 60s with similar features. Williams ran her face through a reverse image search and found her, Lenora Briggs, Glenda's sister. He repositioned his camera with better audio pickup, a directional microphone he used for documentary work. That evening, he recorded their conversation on Glenda's front porch. "Can't believe that ungrateful girl is trying to blame you," Lenora's voice crackled through his speakers. "After everything you did to help her. She was worthless as a mother." Glenda's bitter tone came through clearly. "That baby cried constantly because she didn't know how to handle him. Someone had to teach her. Someone had to show that child who's in charge. You always knew best with children. Look how well Daryl turned out." "Exactly. Firm discipline. That's all babies need. A little shake to stop the crying, a firm grip to show control. My generation understood that." Williams's hands clenched around his laptop. There it was. A confession, clear as day, caught on audio. He immediately called Detective Hendricks, sending the file while they were still on the phone. "This is admissible?" Williams asked. "It's Oregon one-party consent state, and you were in a public area recording a conversation happening outdoors. Should be fine, but let me verify with the DA." 2 hours later, Hendricks called back. "We're moving on Glenda Grant. Search warrant and arrest warrant both approved." "Good work, Williams." The arrest happened the next morning. Williams wasn't there to see it, but Hendricks called with details. Glenda had been belligerent, denied everything at first, then claimed she was only trying to help. Her lawyer tried to spin it as generational differences, but the evidence was mounting. Carly called him sobbing with relief. "They believe me now. The lawyer says the charges against me will probably be dropped." Williams felt a grim satisfaction, but it wasn't enough. Legal justice was one thing. True accountability was another. That night, Williams drafted a plan. Not illegal, exactly, but definitely in a gray area. He'd spent his career telling stories through images, exposing truth. Now he'd craft a different kind of exposure. He reached out to contacts in Portland's media, journalists he'd worked with on documentary projects, editors who trusted his work. He gave them the full story with carefully curated evidence. Glenda's confession, her history, the medical reports showing Elmer's injuries. Within days, the story exploded across local media. Grandmother arrested in shaken baby case. CPS investigation reveals generational abuse pattern. Victim's uncle exposes family secret. Williams made sure Glenda's face was everywhere. Her words about firm discipline and children needing control quoted extensively. He gave interviews painting a picture of a bitter, abusive woman who'd hurt an innocent child and tried to let his mother take the blame. Public opinion turned savage. Glenda's address was published online. People protested outside her house. Her social media accounts were flooded with death threats and harassment. She couldn't leave her house without being recognized and confronted. Williams watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction. This was his revenge, not violence, but exposure, forcing her to face the consequences of her actions in the court of public opinion, where mercy was rare and justice swift. But he wasn't done yet. Through his media contacts, Williams obtained Glenda's phone number. Late one night, with Elmer sleeping peacefully nearby, he called her from a burner phone. "Who is this?" Glenda's voice was shaky, afraid. "Someone who knows what you did," Williams said quietly. "Someone who's going to make sure you never hurt another child." "I didn't. It was an accident. Save it for your lawyer. I'm calling to let you know that every person you hurt, every child you damaged with your discipline, they're all going to know your name now. Your face will be synonymous with child abuse. You'll never have peace again. You can't do this. I have rights." So did Elmer. So did your daughters. So did every child you traumatized with your toxic beliefs. Williams's voice was ice. "This is justice, Glenda. Real justice. You're going to live with what you've done, and everyone will know." He hung up. Over the following weeks, the legal case built momentum. The DA charged Glenda with multiple counts of felony child abuse. Her lawyer tried to negotiate, but with the confession, medical evidence, and Williams's documentation, the case was airtight. Carly was cleared of all charges. She and Daryl started intensive therapy, working to repair their marriage and prepare for Elmer's eventual return home. Williams saw the change in them, especially in Carly, who seemed to wake up from a nightmare. But Williams wasn't ready to give Elmer back. Not yet. Not until he was absolutely certain the child would be safe. 2 months after Glenda's arrest, Williams sat in the prosecutor's office across from ADA Clifton HOU, a methodical man in his 50s who'd built a career on complex abuse cases. "We're offering her a deal," HOU said, sliding papers across the desk. "Plead guilty to reduced charges, 5 years prison time, permanent restraining order from Elmer and any other minors." Williams felt rage bloom in his chest. 5 years? She could have killed him. "I understand your frustration, but trials are risky. Juries are unpredictable, especially with older defendants who present well. Her lawyer will play the generational differences card, make her seem like a confused grandmother who didn't know better. We could lose entirely. You have her confession. We have an ambiguous conversation that her lawyer will claim was taken out of context. The medical evidence is strong, but without Glenda actually admitting she shook Elmer specifically, a defense attorney can create reasonable doubt. How lean forward? 5 years guaranteed versus risking acquittal. I know which I'd choose." Williams left the office furious. 5 years wasn't enough. Not for what she'd done. Not for the terror Elmer had experienced, the pain, the potential lifelong consequences. He needed to think, needed to plan. That evening, Williams received unexpected visitors, Daryl and Carly, standing nervously at his studio door. "Can we come in?" Daryl asked quietly. Williams let them in. They sat awkwardly in his living space, looking at Elmer sleeping in the portable crib Williams had set up. The baby had grown visibly in 2 months, filling out the bruises long faded. He smiled now, cooed at Williams during feedings. He was healing. "We've been in therapy," Carly said softly. "Individual and couples. Working through everything." She paused. "I want to apologize to you, Will, for putting you in this position, for not protecting Elmer sooner. I should have believed you when you tried to tell me about my mother," Daryl added. His voice was rough with emotion. "I was so caught up in work, so sure I knew what was right, that I didn't see what was happening in my own house." Williams studied his brother. Daryl looked different, older, worn down, but also somehow more present than Williams had ever seen him. The corporate polish was gone, replaced with raw vulnerability. "You should have listened," Williams said quietly. To Carly. "To the warning signs. You failed as a father, Daryl." His brother flinched, but didn't argue. "I know. I'm trying to do better. We both are. The therapist says we're making progress," Carly offered. "Learning to communicate, to share responsibilities, to recognize warning signs. We've joined a support group for parents dealing with postpartum issues and family trauma." "That's good," Williams said. "But it doesn't change what happened." "We know." Daryl met his eyes. "We're not asking for forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But we are asking for a chance to prove we can be better parents. When the time comes for Elmer to come home, we want to show you we're ready." Williams felt conflicted. Part of him wanted to refuse, to fight for permanent custody of Elmer. But another part, the part that remembered Daryl teaching him to ride a bike, protecting him from bullies, being a brother before life complicated everything. That part wanted to believe people could change. "I need to see it," Williams said finally. "Not just hear about it. You want Elmer back? Prove you deserve him." They agreed to weekly visits at the studio, supervised by Williams. Slowly, carefully, Daryl and Carly began rebuilding trust. They were attentive, gentle, present in ways they hadn't been before. Carly had started medication for her postpartum depression and seemed like a different person, engaged, warm, actually bonding with her son. But Williams remained watchful. He documented everything, took notes on their interactions, looked for any red flags. Once burned, he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Meanwhile, Glenda's case progressed. She refused the plea deal, convinced she could win at trial. Her lawyer, Petra Todd, the same one who'd initially represented Daryl and Carly, built a defense around reasonable doubt and generational misunderstanding. Williams attended every pre-trial hearing, sitting in the gallery watching Glenda. She never looked at him, kept her eyes forward, playing the role of a confused elderly woman who'd only tried to help. It was a good performance. But Williams had learned something important during his surveillance weeks. Glenda Grant wasn't acting alone. Her sister Lenora had been complicit, encouraging her, validating her abusive methods. And there were others, members of an online community Glenda frequented, people who shared her toxic beliefs about child discipline. Williams had infiltrated that community using a fake profile, documenting their conversations. What he found was disturbing. Parents and grandparents sharing techniques for controlling children, comparing notes on how to leave minimal evidence, encouraging each other to ignore modern soft parenting advice. It was a network of abuse, hidden in plain sight online. He brought this information to Detective Hendricks. This is bigger than just Glenda. There are dozens of people in this group, maybe hundreds. How many children are being hurt by this ideology? Hendricks looked through the screenshots, his expression darkening. This is beyond my scope. This needs federal involvement, FBI, Child Exploitation Division. Within a week, a federal investigation was launched. Williams's documentation became the foundation for a larger probe into online communities promoting child abuse under the guise of traditional discipline. But while the federal case built slowly, Glenda's trial approached fast. The trial began on a cold Monday in February. Williams sat behind the prosecution table. Elmer, now 4 months old and thriving, safe with a vetted babysitter. He'd insisted on being present for every moment. HOU's opening statement was strong, laying out the evidence methodically. Glenda's lawyer countered with appeals to sympathy, a confused grandmother from a different time, trying to help overwhelmed parents, accidentally causing harm through ignorance. The medical testimony was damning. Dr. Gallagher walked the jury through Elmer's injuries with calm precision, explaining exactly what force was needed to cause such damage. This wasn't accidental, he concluded. These injuries require intentional violence. Carly testified, describing Glenda's criticism and control, the changes she noticed in Elmer after Glenda's visits. She was credible, sympathetic, but Petra Todd's cross-examination tried to paint her as an unreliable mother looking for someone to blame. Daryl testified about his mother's beliefs, admitting he'd been blind to the danger. His testimony felt honest, painful, a son acknowledging his mother's capacity for harm. Then Williams testified. He walked the jury through finding Elmer, the bruises, his decision to act. He showed the photos he'd taken, explained his investigation, played the recording of Glenda's confession. Petra Todd tried to discredit the recording, suggesting it was taken out of context or misinterpreted. But Williams had prepared for this, brought in audio forensic experts who verified the recording's authenticity and clarity. On cross-examination, Petra went after Williams's motives. Isn't it true you had a strained relationship with your brother? That you resented his success, his family? My relationship with Daryl is complicated, Williams admitted. But this isn't about him. It's about protecting a child who is being hurt. Isn't it convenient that your investigation paints your brother's mother as the villain while clearing your brother and his wife? It's not convenient. It's what the evidence shows. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Expert after expert testified. Child psychologists, abuse specialists, forensic investigators. The prosecution built an overwhelming case. But Glenda's lawyer had one final card to play. They called character witnesses, people who knew Glenda as a volunteer at her church, a friendly neighbor, a devoted grandmother to her other grandchildren, the ones Williams learned she saw rarely and only at supervised family events. The defense tried to create doubt. Could this nice older woman really be capable of such violence? In her closing argument, Petra Todd played heavily on generational differences. Glenda Grant grew up in a time when parenting was different, firmer. What we now call abuse, they called discipline. She didn't shake baby Elmer out of malice. She was trying to quiet his crying using methods she'd been taught were acceptable. It was a strong argument. Williams saw some jurors nodding. But HOU's closing was stronger. The defense wants you to excuse violence as a generational misunderstanding. But Glenda Grant didn't live in the 1950s. She lived in 2024. She had access to modern parenting information. She chose to ignore it. She chose her own beliefs over a child's safety. And when that child suffered injuries that could have killed him, she said nothing, did nothing, let others take the blame. HOU pointed at the medical photos blown up on screens. These injuries don't lie. The retinal hemorrhages don't lie. And Glenda Grant's own words, caught on recording, don't lie. She hurt this baby, and she needs to be held accountable. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Williams spent those days caring for Elmer, trying to maintain normalcy while anxiety gnawed at him. What if they acquitted? What if Glenda walked free? On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Williams's phone rang. "Hendricks, verdict's in. Get down here." Williams arranged for Wendy Barnett to watch Elmer and rushed to the courthouse. The courtroom was packed. Media, family members, advocates. Williams found a seat behind the prosecution table just as the jury filed in. He studied their faces, looking for clues. Most wouldn't meet Glenda's eyes. That had to be good, right? The judge asked for the verdict. The forewoman stood, a black woman in her 40s who'd taken extensive notes throughout the trial. On the count of felony child abuse in the 1st degree, we find the defendant guilty. Williams felt something release in his chest. Around him, people reacted. Carly's sob of relief, Daryl's exhaled breath, murmurs from the gallery. But the forewoman wasn't done. On the count of assault in the 2nd degree, guilty. On the count of criminal mistreatment in the 1st degree, guilty. Guilty on all counts. Glenda's face crumbled. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook it off, turning to glare at Williams across the courtroom. The hatred in her eyes was pure, undiluted. Williams stared back, unflinching. He'd won. Justice had been served. But he wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. The prosecution asked for the maximum, 15 years. The defense pleaded for leniency, given Glenda's age and lack of prior criminal convictions. Williams submitted a victim impact statement, writing from Elmer's perspective, what the child had suffered, what he'd lost in terms of trust and safety, what his future might hold. He described finding Elmer crying, the terror of seeing those bruises, the helplessness of knowing someone he should have been able to trust had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. The judge, a woman named Viola Hayden who presided with firm fairness throughout, read Williams's statement aloud in court. Then she turned to Glenda. "Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Glenda stood, her lawyer beside her. Williams expected denial, excuses, the same victim blaming he'd seen throughout the trial. Instead, Glenda said, "I did what I thought was right. What I was taught was right. If that makes me a criminal in this soft, permissive society, so be it. But I won't apologize for trying to teach that child proper behavior." The courtroom erupted. Judge Hayden's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order!" Williams felt cold fury. Even now, even after everything, she showed no remorse. No understanding of the harm she'd caused. Judge Hayden's voice was ice. "Ms. Grant, in my 20 years on the bench, I've seen many defendants. Some show genuine remorse. Some struggle to understand their actions. Some try to minimize harm. You, however, stand before me utterly unrepentant, convinced of your righteousness even as the evidence of your cruelty is irrefutable." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You took a helpless infant and hurt him. Repeatedly, violently, and you feel no shame. That tells me everything I need to know about your character and the danger you pose to vulnerable children. On the count of felony child abuse in the 1st degree, I sentence you to 10 years in the custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections. On the counts of assault and criminal mistreatment, 5 years each to run consecutively. Total sentence, 20 years, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. 20 years. Glenda would be in her 80s when released if she lived that long. Williams watched as officers led her away in handcuffs, her face shocked, finally understanding the weight of consequences. It felt good. It felt right. But still not enough. That night, Williams sat with Elmer, watching the baby play with soft blocks. The child had no memory of what had been done to him, would grow up knowing only the story he'd be told. In some ways, that was a mercy. In others, it was a tragedy. Elmer would never understand his own origin story, the violence that had marked his earliest days. Williams's phone buzzed. An unknown email. He opened it, expecting spam. Instead, he found a message from one of Glenda's daughters, the ones who'd cut contact years ago. Williams had reached out to them during his investigation, but they'd refused to speak publicly. The email was brief. "Thank you for stopping her. She hurt us too, when we were small. No one believed us then. I'm glad someone believes now. I'm glad someone finally made her pay." Dolores. Williams sat for a long time, thinking about cycles of abuse, about courage and cowardice, about the difference between justice and revenge. He'd gotten justice for Elmer. But what about the others? The children hurt in that online community? The victims who'd never been believed? An idea began forming, dangerous and compelling. Over the next month, Williams worked with federal investigators, providing everything he'd collected on the online abuse community. He gave media interviews, wrote op-eds, used his platform as a photographer to shine light on the hidden networks promoting child abuse under various guises. His work went viral. Mainstream media picked up the story. Tech companies shut down the forums. Parents were arrested, children removed from dangerous homes. Investigations launched across multiple states. Williams became the face of the investigation, the protective uncle who'd exposed systemic abuse. He hated the attention, but understood its value. Every interview, every article, every social media post meant more people were aware, more children potentially saved. But late at night, alone with Elmer, Williams wondered if it was enough. Would it ever be enough? How many children were still suffering because no one looked, no one acted, no one cared enough to intervene? He thought about his own father, about the distance that had grown between them over Williams's choice to pursue art instead of stability. His father had died disappointed in him, or so Williams had always believed. But would his father be proud now? Seeing Williams protect family, fight for the vulnerable, use his skills for something that mattered beyond galleries and grants? Williams would never know, and that hurt in its own way. 6 months after Glenda's sentencing, the custody hearing for Elmer took place. The judge reviewed everything: therapy records, home studies, psychological evaluations, Williams's observations of Daryl and Carly's progress. Winnie Barnett testified that the couple had done everything asked of them, had genuinely transformed their approach to parenting. Dr. Gallagher confirmed Elmer's complete physical recovery. Detective Hendricks stated the investigation found no evidence that Daryl or Carly had directly harmed the child. The defense called Williams to testify about what he'd observed during 6 months of supervised visits. He told the truth. Daryl and Carly had changed. They were attentive, responsive, genuinely engaged with their son in ways they hadn't been before. Carly's mental health treatment was ongoing and effective. Daryl had reduced his work hours, reprioritized his life around family. "Do you believe Elmer would be safe in their care?" the judge asked. Williams hesitated. Every protective instinct screamed to say no, to fight for permanent custody. Elmer was his now, in all the ways that mattered. He'd bonded with this child, knew his cries and smiles, his preferences and patterns. But he also knew the truth. "Yes," Williams said quietly. "I believe he'd be safe. I believe they've learned and changed. And I believe Elmer deserves to grow up with his parents, if they can be what he needs." The judge ordered a gradual transition. Overnight visits, then weekends, then full custody with Williams maintaining regular contact and visitation rights written into the order. The first night Williams returned to his studio alone, silence felt oppressive. No baby monitor, number 2 AM feedings, no small life depending on him. Just empty space and echoes. He sat at his computer, trying to work on photography projects that had languished for months. But nothing felt meaningful anymore. How could he care about composing shots or color balance when children were being hurt, when evil hid in plain sight? His phone rang. A familiar number, Detective Hendricks. "Got something you might want to hear. Remember Glenda's sister, Lenora? The one who encouraged her? That's the one. Turns out she's been under investigation too. Federal probe into that online community you helped expose. They found evidence she was actively coaching other members on how to abuse kids without leaving evidence. She's being charged federally." Williams felt grim satisfaction. "Good. There's more." The community had hundreds of members. So far, 73 have been charged across 16 states. Children have been removed from dangerous homes, placed in protective custody. Your documentation started all of it. After hanging up, Williams sat in the quiet, processing. He'd wanted revenge against Glinda for hurting Elmer. He'd gotten that. And more. She'd spent decades in prison, her reputation destroyed, her beliefs exposed as the toxic ideology they were. But the real victory wasn't personal revenge. It was the children saved, the abusers caught, the system changed however slightly to better protect the vulnerable. That night, Williams pulled out his camera for the first time in months. Not for a client, not for a project, just for himself. He photographed his empty studio, the shadows and light, the space where Elmer had healed and grown. He photographed the city outside his window, Portland streets where countless lives intersected, where joy and tragedy played out in private homes behind closed doors. He photographed his own hands, the hands that had held a hurt child, that had documented abuse, that had fought for justice. These images would never be displayed, never be sold. They were just for him, a record of transformation. The photographer who'd always observed from a distance had stepped into the frame, become part of the story, changed its outcome. 3 days later, Williams visited Daryl and Carly's house for dinner. The first time he'd been invited since the investigation began. The house looked different. The nursery had been repainted in soft colors, the damaged wall repaired. Photos of Elmer covered every surface, capturing his growth and recovery. Carly had cooked simple food, nothing fancy, but made with care. They sat together, the three of them and Elmer in his high chair, attempting normalcy. "We're selling this house," Daryl said quietly. "Too many bad memories. Found a place closer to your studio. Actually, thought maybe you'd want to be near enough to drop by regularly." Williams nodded. "I'd like that." "We can never thank you enough," Carly added, her eyes shining with tears. "For saving him. For believing me. For giving us a chance to prove we could change." "Just keep proving it," Williams said. "Every day. That's all the thanks I need." That night, driving home through Portland's rain-slicked streets, Williams felt something he hadn't experienced in years: peace. Not happiness exactly. Too much had happened for simple happiness. But peace. The quiet knowledge that he'd done what needed doing, protected who needed protecting, stood up when others would have looked away. His phone chimed. An email from a gallery owner who'd seen his recent media appearances, interested in displaying his documentary work about abuse and advocacy. An opportunity to use his art for purpose again, to keep shining light on darkness. William smiled. Maybe his father would have been proud after all. He thought about Elmer, sleeping safely in his crib at Daryl and Carly's house. About Glinda, beginning her 20-year sentence. About the children rescued from the online abuse network. About cycles broken and justice served. It wasn't a perfect ending. Nothing ever was. But it was an ending where the good guy won, where the innocent were protected, where consequences found those who deserved them. William Sullivan had started this journey as a photographer who observed life from behind a lens. He'd emerged as something different, a protector, an advocate, someone willing to fight. And if another child needed help, another injustice needed exposing, another battle needed fighting, Williams would be ready. The rain continued falling on Portland, washing the streets clean, and Williams drove home knowing he'd done everything in his power to make his small corner of the world a little bit safer, a little bit more just. That would have to be enough, because some victories weren't about perfect endings. They were about choosing to act when action mattered, standing firm when others faltered, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves.